Thank you, Speaker. My question this morning is for the Premier. Speaker, the Premier is being sued again. This time by CUPE. At this point, there are so many investigations and depositions that you actually need to buy a program to keep track of them all, Mr. Speaker. So why is the government being sued by CUPE today? Because the lawsuit alleges they crossed an ethical line when they tried to use the Hydro One sale to raise money from the big banks who sold it off. Speaker, will the Premier reprimand these ministers for crossing an ethical line, or will she admit that they were acting on her own orders when they used the very unpopular Hydro One sale to bankroll for the Liberal Party of Ontario?
Good question.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to rise to answer the member's question. I think it's important to recognize that now that there's a legal process underway, we're going to let that process unfold, so we can't comment on that directly. But what we can comment on is that the Integrity Commissioner has already looked into this and recently confirmed that there was no wrongdoing. So what we're going to do now, Mr. Speaker, is we're going to focus as a government in building Ontario up and helping people in their everyday lives. Broadening the ownership of Hydro One is a crucial part of that plan, Mr. Speaker. Just this past few weeks, I've been going through Ontario, making announcements in Kapuskasing of over $2 million for infrastructure. In North Bay, over $5 million for infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. So that's great news for the people of Ontario. And these new infrastructure projects will lead to new jobs, new investments, and more economic activity for this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Speaker. We had such high hopes for the new minister, but it looks like he's gone from drinking a jug full of orange Kool-Aid to the red. This government, Mr. Speaker, they fight with the doctors and they get sued. They fight with the teachers and they get sued. They sell Hydro One and they get sued. Cancelling gas plants, offering appointments in Sudbury, and turning the province's air ambulance into a mess, all got them investigated by the OPP. 5 OPP investigations, Mr. Speaker. At this point, I think part of the deficit is just going to go to pay the legal bills for cabinet ministers. Speaker, my question for the Premier is a simple one. Why does it always take a deposition or a police investigation for us to get the truth? And if this is the most transparent government, as the Premier always claims, why do they only provide information after they get a court order?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Be seated, please. Be seated, please.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and once again, it's always an honour for me to be able to rise and answer the honourable member's question. As I mentioned earlier, because there's now a legal process, I'm not able to talk about that, but what I can talk about, Mr. Speaker, is the more great things that are happening with the broadening and the sale of Hydro One. So we're on track to realize our budget target of approximately $9 billion, Mr. Speaker, generated through the IPO, $4 billion for infrastructure investment and $5 billion for debt repayment. This is allowing us, Mr. Speaker, to make investments without corresponding increases in debt, deficits, or cuts to other programs or services. We still own 70% of Hydro One shares and have generated a large portion of our target revenue. With 30% more shares to offer, we are on track, Mr. Speaker, to ensure the best possible value for the people of Ontario.